You're listening to Myers-Briggs Question Corner with Edythe Richards.
Hello, listeners. A few weeks back, I did a podcast entitled Using the Myers-Briggs in a Job Interview. I talked about three main points in that podcast: why the Myers-Briggs or any personality assessment should not be used in the recruiting process, my own experience of being asked about my Myers-Briggs type during an interview and how I successfully navigated the question, and how you, as a candidate, can handle tricky interview questions. For today's podcast, I'd like to talk about why certain Myers-Briggs types may find interviews challenging and what they can do to prepare to combat nerves and perform eloquently and confidently. In my nearly 20 years of being a career counselor, I've found that job search success boils down to three things. First, lack of opportunities, meaning that the industry or position you're looking for may not be available in your particular region of the country. This one is difficult to control unless you move to an area where your industry is prominent or do what it takes to get on the radar of employers in your field in your area, however competitive that process is. Second, lack of knowledge, skills, and preparation. And third is lack of emotional intelligence. For our purposes today, I'm going to focus on the latter two. And although I could go on and on about both of these, for now I'll say that if you're in the Washington, D.C. metro area, I regularly conduct resume and job search workshops in Arlington, Virginia. And if you're looking for up-to-date advice on today's best practices, please shoot me a quick email at Edythe, that's Edythe, at atopcareer.com to learn about my next session. Additionally, I have a new podcast series in pre-production entitled The Emotionally Intelligent Job Seeker, so please be on the lookout for that later in 2020. Let's take a closer look at these job search challenges as they relate to interviewing specifically and Myers-Briggs personality types. First, lack of knowledge, skills, and lack of preparation. A lot of job seekers simply aren't knowledgeable about how today's job search process works. If you're searching online on a mega job aggregator site like Indeed.com, submitting the same generic resume to multiple positions, you're putting yourself at a huge disadvantage, and your resume probably isn't going through the applicant tracking systems, or ATS, which are the computer systems that screen the most qualified applicants for a position. Over 95% of companies use ATS to screen candidates, so odds are that in order to obtain the job that you want, you're going to have to get through them. This means taking the time to tailor your resume each and every time you send it out. A tedious and often thankless process, yes. Luckily, there's a great resource out there that will help you. JobScan, and that's jobscan.co, not .com. This website will allow you to copy and paste your resume and the job description, and it will give you practical tips on how to modify your resume to increase your chances of having it read by an actual human being. But be mindful, you have 5 free scans per month, so use them wisely. This part of the process, before the actual interview starts, may be especially difficult for SP types. That's ESTP, ISTP, ESFP, and ISFP. I say this because these personality types are very tactile, straightforward types who tend to get stressed out when they're forced to get stuck in the minutia of writing and strategizing, unless it's spur of the moment. They're impatient with theoretical tasks and just want to get things done. They may also have trouble developing a structure or a routine for their job search. They're very solutions-focused, in-the-moment type people, and they may be slow to understand that a lot of the time they spend on writing accomplishments for their resume, understanding themselves, and understanding the needs of their potential employers will actually save them time in the long run and win them points in the interview. Let's face it, information is power. The more you know about your strengths and weaknesses and the people you'll be talking to, the better you'll be able to prepare yourself accordingly. Painful though this will be, my SP friends, get yourself into a schedule of devoting 1 to 2 hours per day to writing your resume and job searching, and list the help of a career counselor or coach if needed. Now, here's another very different challenge that relates to another area of skills and preparation: lack of clarity. This could include a resume that isn't cohesive, gaps on your resume that could indicate job hopping, or a resume that shows you aren't currently working. As much as I hate to say this, I've got to be honest. If your resume doesn't have a title that lists current or present, chances are you'll be passed over. From an employer or recruiter's point of view, this looks like you're unemployed, and like it or not, that's where bias, often unconscious bias, kicks in. What have you been doing since you last worked? Why aren't you working now? If at all possible, I encourage all job seekers to have something on their resumes that says current or present, a part-time job, consulting, your own business, or even a volunteer role. Now, on a resume, you don't have to indicate that it's part-time or volunteer. It's different on a job application, where you often have to state the number of hours per week you work. The fact is, the closer aligned your current title is to the position you're applying for, the more likely you'll be invited in for an interview. ENFPs and ENTPs, and possibly INFPs and INTPs, may have the most trouble deciding on one singular career path and conforming to what an employer is looking for. Because of the process of extroverted intuition, which all four of these Myers-Briggs types use, future possibilities, general ideas, and nebulous concepts could be the focus, which can often prevent you from settling on one path. Now, you're not going to be able to write a proper resume if you're struggling with this. If this sounds like you, my tip is to stop searching for jobs and sending out your resume. Take time to talk to a trusted advisor, coach, or figure out on your own what your target career path is. My other podcast series, Myers-Briggs for Midlife Career Changers, can help you with this. Or, if you prefer reading, I have a quick article on my website entitled 5 Questions to Help Clarify Your Career Path on www.atopcareer.com. Moving on to emotional intelligence. If you're not familiar with the concept, essentially emotional intelligence, or EQ, is your ability to understand your emotions and respond to them effectively in order to produce the behavior that you want. There are many different components of EQ, and I've talked about them most recently as a guest on my friend Dan Smolin's podcast in a 2-part episode entitled How EQ Helps People to Succeed in Meaningful Work. The link is provided in the notes. So, interviewing is all about making a great first impression. And this first impression could be the difference between getting a job offer and turning your interviewer off completely. Many people, regardless of personality type, aren't aware of how they come across to others, and as a result, unintentionally sabotage themselves. One of the best things you can do, whether you're a new college graduate or a senior career professional, is to get some honest feedback about your communication skills and overall how you show up and carry yourself. It takes a really mature, aware, and emotionally intelligent person to not only ask for feedback on potentially weak areas, but to take active steps to improve themselves. Once you become aware of the connections between your emotions and your behaviors, you'll have a better chance of recognizing the automatic reactions that may be getting in the way of your job search. Now, any Myers-Briggs type can be emotionally intelligent or not. The fact is that whatever our personality type, there will be some aspects of emotional intelligence that come easier to us than others. To begin the discussion on EQ as it relates to our purposes today, I'd like to cite 3 elements that I've seen are particularly important to job seekers and some active steps you can take to get yourself ahead of the game if you can relate. The first EQ element I'd like to discuss is one called stress tolerance. This is our ability and tendency to cope effectively in challenging and stressful situations. People who are skilled in this area are good at adapting to stress. They're calm and resilient and maintain a positive attitude. In the job search, this is vital. You've got bills to pay and loved ones to take care of, and you may be juggling multiple responsibilities and shifting priorities. If stress tolerance is something that doesn't come naturally to you, there are a few things you can do to keep it from sabotaging your job search. Think about an unpleasant situation that happened recently. Missing out on an opportunity, saying something you later regretted, for example. Make note of what happened and how you dealt with a stressful situation. Did you procrastinate? Did you let your frustration get the best of you? Once you've sufficiently relived that unpleasant event, think about how you would prefer to deal with stress the next time you're faced with it. What's the ideal solution? Note that interviews are notoriously stressful situations, but the key is not to let the stress interfere with showing the interviewer why you're the right person for the role. Think about role-playing some interview scenarios with a trusted colleague so you'll be ready when the time comes. The second element I'd like to cite is one called reality testing. This is your ability and tendency to assess the here and now reality of any given moment. People who are skilled in this element are able to look at a situation realistically, not what they wish or fear it to be. Now, speaking of fear, if you're like 70% of Americans, you're afraid of failure. Fear of failure is linked to so many causes, such as traumatic life events, unsupportive parents, low self-esteem, or perfectionism. If this is something you struggle with, be honest with yourself. What are you really afraid of? Pinpointing the underlying cause of fear is the first step in conquering it. Yes, change is scary, but it's also exhilarating. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that says taking a risk is worth it, financially and otherwise. So before you give up your dream of pursuing a different career path, take some time to realistically assess it before you dismiss it completely. You might be pleasantly surprised. The third element I want to address is a big one: self-regard. This is your ability and tendency to like yourself, to have confidence in yourself and your abilities. Now, self-regard, like all EQ elements, can be overdone or underdone. When it's underdone, you see yourself as inferior and may lack self-esteem. It's very easy for job seekers to lose self-regard, especially in the face of rejection or after applying for multiple jobs and getting nowhere. And this is not how you want to show up on an interview. A couple things you can do. Make note of your accomplishments. Not only are today's resumes accomplishment-driven, but you'll need to be able to sell yourself in an interview. And the most effective way to do that is with your accomplishment stories. Your top achievements should be relative to the company you're interviewing with. So you'll need to adequately research the company so you know how they're measuring success, what their current projects are, etc. Based on what the company is looking for, make note of your significant achievements so that you can have a direct impact on the person you're interviewing with. Two other things to help you out here. First, silence your inner critic. Anxiety and negativity isn't going to help you at all. Second, make sure you're spending time with and talking to your friends and family. Our relationships are what's going to get us through the tough times. Now, self-regard can also be overdone. We've all encountered people like this, people who show up as arrogant, self-important jerks. But what if you are the one who's gotten this feedback? The last way you want to show up in an interview is as overconfident with a big ego. In looking at personality types specifically here, the types most vulnerable to this are ESTJ, ENTJ, INTJ, and ISTJ. These types all use extroverted thinking, which is by far the coldest, most domineering of the 8 cognitive functions. These folks may forget that people are people, not tools for their own manipulation or judgment. A little bit of humbleness goes a long way in an interview. Unfortunately, I've worked with a lot of job seekers who blame anything and anyone for their inability to land a job. They blame their resumes for lack of interviews, or their age, or the competition in the area, whatever, except themselves. Some of these folks really aren't the best listeners. They calculate their responses instead of listening to what the other person has to say, and they're thus missing an important element to effective communication. Without realizing it, they're showing up as disrespectful to others, and these could be others who could hire or recommend them. If this sounds like you, one thing you can do that can balance other areas of EQ is to make the people you're talking to feel valued and important. Remember, it's not all about you. Take a few moments to ask others about their interests first. And by all means, take responsibility for your actions. Honor your own good word. And be the person who takes responsibility when things go wrong. If you hurt someone in the process, apologize sincerely and make a sincere effort at reparation. Check out my article, Understanding the Power of Empathy. A link is available in the podcast notes. Emotional intelligence is so important in the job search, in networking, and in interviewing. Emotions are one of the main things that disrupt communications and persuasion. When we can control our own emotions, we have a better chance of getting our point across effectively. And if we can sense the emotions of others, we're able to draw conclusions about what other people are feeling and relate to them in a meaningful way, which will ultimately result in building credibility in a job interview. To sum it up, if you're not getting the results that you want from your job search, you're certainly not alone. But blaming your personality type isn't going to get you far, though there are some Myers-Briggs types who struggle more with certain areas of the job search than others. What an effective job search really boils down to is knowing your career target, understanding your own personal strengths and weaknesses and how they relate to obtaining the position you want, how to navigate today's job market and the modern job search process, and how you choose to show up. Please be on the lookout for part 3 of this series, where we'll look at specific interview questions and how you can best answer them.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you'd like to hear more, or you'd like to submit a question yourself, then you can find us at www.atopcareer.com. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.